Hi, all. It's Jerome, and today we're going to talk about sustainability and coffee. That's so perfect for us. This conversation is with Josh Holt from Coffee Story, a London based specialty coffee roaster that's woven sustainable practices and sustainable thinking into their business model. For more information on Coffee Story, you should absolutely check out their website at coffeestory.uk. So, in addition to that little intro, I have two other reasons for popping in. First off, Coffee Story's Instagram handle is at coffeestory.uk, and so is their website, and that's the name that I put in all my notes. But their business name is just Coffee Story, and they're located in the UK. In the beginning of this conversation, I mistakenly referred to them as Coffee Story UK, but it's just Coffee Story. As I was editing this one, I could tell that Josh wanted to correct me, but he's just too polite. I do correct myself during the episode, but I want to make sure that we all support the right company, Coffee Story. Also, right before our first coffee break, Josh throws a little shade towards some larger coffee roasters and retailers, so at his request, I dropped the sound when he says their name. Because, nobody here is trying to get sued. Okay? Okay, let's go. Hey everybody, welcome back to Bottomless Coffee. And today we are going to talk about sustainability. So I'm Jerome, I'm your caffeinated host. And as we talked about in episode 7, it is really important when discussing sustainability that industry leads the change in sustainable practices. Because if I am as responsible as possible, if I have even like a carbon regenerative footprint, then if producers continue to behave in the same unsustainable and toxic way, then we're really not going to see any change. However, if producers pivot to a more sustainable business practice, then I, as a consumer, will also be more sustainable. And for my mental health, this makes me very happy. My neighbors and friends and strangers I've never met will also be more sustainable. And so today, for our very first conversation with someone in an industry, in general, right? A producer, we've got someone, Josh, who is practicing sustainability in, get this, coffee. It's really pretty perfect for us. How are you, Josh?
I am good, thank you. Really excited to be here.
Good. So there is a little bit of a time difference. I'm in Minneapolis. You're in Europe, the UK, right?
In London, yes.
Yes. And so it's just a little bit later in the day for Josh to be having coffee. But for those of us who can see the video, there are tubs and tubs of magic beans behind him. Now, Josh, very quickly, what are your pronouns?
He and his.
Okay, fantastic. And you started Coffee Story UK.
Yes, absolutely.
Well, can you just tell us a little bit about Coffee Story UK and how this happened? How'd you end up here?
Well, it's a bit of a weird journey. Because I began my working life in student activism. I was the
Oh,
president of a student union in the UK, the Union of Jewish Students, so like very much like political. I always thought I was going to go down the whole civil service kind of route and go into
yeah.
politics and all this type of thing. And while I love it and I always will have an interest and passion in political engagement, I kind of after working in that field for a year, I thought, nah, this isn't for me. This isn't what I want to do. And I want to do something completely different. And so,
Yeah, I think completely different is Accurate, a good description. So you know Dahlia from our last episode. She's based in Germany, right?
Yeah.
So were you in Germany at the time?
When I decided to go into this kind of field.
Well, the previous field.
Oh, so working in student politics. No, I was based in the UK.
Okay.
So the Union of Jewish Students is like a representative body of Jewish students in the UK. But
Yeah.
also, as well as that, I decided to be involved in the European Union of Jewish Students as well, which is
Gotcha.
like the European-wide kind of union body. I met Dahlia through that. Got involved, came to the States with them for various, like I think it was the AJC Congress or something. So, like,
Cool.
was able to do that with Dahlia as well, and try and stay involved. Like, always have my ear to the ground with what's going on in that world. But as I said, I decided I just need to. That can be a passion and interest, but not what I want to kind of make my career and base my career around.
So instead, you're focused on the magic beans, the coffee beans,
Yeah,
and the tag for Coffee Story is ethical, responsible, and delicious. And so, like, I've done like a smidgen of research on your company, but maybe introduce us to Coffee Story UK and what you do, and then let's really dive into the ethical and responsible part of the tag.
absolutely. So I kind of the way I got into this whole random, very very random field, is my girlfriend is Ethiopian, and I went over there to visit her family who are still out there, and they have some family friends who are huge, like the biggest coffee exporters in Ethiopia. And so I
Oh,
just remember we went to their offices, and they had like a kind of a coffee, like we'll call them a sample roaster. So like little roasters, like lots of different kind of chambers to roast in. And we did a coffee cupping, and I just thought this is the best thing ever.
oh
Like
my
it
gosh.
smells fantastic. I'd always loved coffee, but I'd never kind of known much about it. And I thought, okay, this is when I finish. I'm going to save up all my wage from here on out, and this is what I'm going to do. But I don't want to just start any old coffee company. I don't want to kind of. There's a lot of people doing this type of thing, and a lot of people making bold claims. And so, what I wanted to do with Coffee Story was kind of come up with a USP that I hope to not be a USP very soon, and that is
Hmm.
doing ethical properly, like actually kind of following through um, with what it is. So when you buy coffee from us, what I'd like to do is tie my personal success, the business's success, in with the success of farmers who are practicing sustainable and responsible, environmentally conscious and socially conscious practices.
Yeah.
So kind of like touching on that tagline of ethical, responsible, delicious. And so the ethical side in my mind, it kind of is all about doing the right thing, but more than just the headline. So you can say, I don't know, um, all our coffee is organic or fair trade, and that's really great. But actually, when you delve into that, and not to knock organic or fair trade, but just for me and for my journey and the business and what I think has the most impact,
Hmm.
organic and fair trade are fantastic for massive producers, but they have to pay for those certifications. And so when you're insisting on producers who can't even afford fertilizers, like for example in Ethiopia, they don't use chemical fertilizers because the farmers are suffering massive poverty. And when you then insist on certification, not
Yeah.
only do you not have access to a huge array of fantastic coffees, but you also kind of pushing smallholder farmers out of the picture. And that's true for all these certifications. But obviously that headline isn't there. And so for the kind of the very essence of what I mean by ethical is delving into this whole sphere in a much more holistic, much more, I believe, considered way of actually where is the maximum benefit, the maximum good for
Yeah.
the farmers. And so the way that we decided to do that was to give back 10% of all of our retail profits to farmers at origin um, to support those projects on that
That's
origin. So
fantastic.
I can get into the projects themselves a bit later, maybe.
Wow. Okay. Okay. So, you would not have had a chance to probably hear this episode on environmentalism yet, but I was very caffeinated for that episode, and we were all over the place. And we did come to this question of how you do the most good, how you make sure that you're doing the most good. And so it kind of sounds like these certifications look really pretty on the packaging, but they don't necessarily mean that you're doing the most good for the farmers in particular who are practicing, organic practices because they have to, but they have no way of advertising that practice. So that's really fantastic that you chose to support them in this way. And then you mentioned an acronym. Was it URP?
Oh,
UPR?
USP. So,
USP. Can you tell us what USP is?
so like a unique selling point. So when it's like, yeah, I mean, starting up the business and just making sure that you have something that makes you stand out from the competition. And as I'm sure you have in the US, you have in the UK as well, massive specialty coffee scene. There's new roasters
Sure.
popping up all the time. So it's just some point of differentiation, and that's becoming it's becoming a lot harder because there's
Yeah.
I think in the UK there's close to 500 or 600 specialty coffee roasters, and that number is growing all the time. And in the US it's obviously significantly more. And everyone's making claims like ethical coffee. That's you see that a lot. I think there's a good story actually. If we have time for this, just a quick little kind of side note. So I remember going to a specialty coffee association event, and hearing from I believe it was a Norwegian coffee roaster, and he basically coined the term direct trade. Um,
Okay.
and direct trade being dealing directly with the farmers. So he had this phrase, and because he's a very nice guy, every coffee producer roaster that wanted to use that term direct trade, he would just send them an email, ask them some questions, and if they kind of could meet the criteria of what it actually meant, traceability and so on, he would say to them, "Fantastic, please use this." And then it was one of the largest coffee roasting companies, a massive large company in this country that he was in. They started using it. So he got in touch with them and said, "I'm really excited that you're using this term direct trade. Um, and I just wanted to kind of ask you these questions to ensure that your practice is in the spirit of what this means." And he heard back from their lawyers, sending him effectively cease and desist letters, and they have gone ahead and
Oh.
barred him from using this and basically threatened him with legal action should he carry on. So I think that the kind of from this story, this was like right at the very beginning of my journey, and what I took from this was that you, with all the best intention in the world, unfortunately, you have large multinationals who use this as marketing. And so for
Yeah.
me and for Coffee Story, it's about more than marketing. It's about kind of measurable impact on the ground, and I think a lot of that comes down to kind of knowing um, within yourself that what you're doing is good. And so, kind of going back to what you're saying about how to do good, how to know what's good, I think that as long as you're not talking for the farmers, as long as you're not kind of telling, I could go and tell you a load of stuff that farmers think, but obviously I don't know that because I'm not a farmer. And so I think it's just kind of
Yeah.
ensuring that what I'm trying to do is amplify those voices, but not detract from their own ability to tell their own stories. And so I feel that when you don't have that, so when you have there's this story with direct trade, like this very well-meaning term that actually now you see that plastered everywhere and it doesn't mean anything.
Wow. That sucks.
A little bit.
It was such a nice marketing mark, or such a nice bit of distinction, and now it's ruined, which is really unfortunate. Now you kind of really hit on, I think, the story part of your brand, right? So I think coffee, we have a sense of it here on Bottomless Coffee, but when you mentioned the story and not wanting to speak for the farmers, but to amplify those voices. Now, I think I saw a little bit of that on your Instagram, for instance. But how else do you work to amplify the voices of those farmers?
So, kind of the way that we do this, I just remember starting there, getting in touch with a load of coffee brokers, because it's a new business that you can't.
Yeah.
They have minimum order quantities. It's very difficult. And I was basically saying to them, like, can you give me the contact details of the farmers so I can send them an email and ask their bank details and transfer 10% of the profits I make into their bank account. And everyone just said, no, that's not how it works. Like, not going to
Oh,
happen. We're
okay.
not going to give you our contacts. Not a chance. Um, and so that was kind of like this introduction. And so what I found was the world of like Instagram and especially is fantastic because a load of farmers and cooperatives are actually on Instagram. I get messages daily from different people
Oh,
saying, "Can you try our coffees?" And what we do is if it kind of matches what we're hoping to sell to our customers, we do that. We take the samples, and then I'll only ever buy a coffee that I really believe in, that I really feel has the potential, and the measure for that is like social commitment, environmental commitment. So making sure that they're kind of paying their workers a good wage and have all these measures in place, and also that they're caring for the environment. That's kind of like the baseline. Um, so then, kind of in terms of sharing that, well, every single packet that we buy, it really slows us down. But every single packet of coffee that we
mm.
sell has the story about the coffee on the back of it. So that way, when you buy it, you are brewing it, and you can like have a little read of all about it. And then
I
obviously,
think.
sorry.
Oh, well, one, I think that's wonderful. And I think about how you put that commitment to your ethos just right on the packaging. And it sounds like you were informed by the lesson of that direct trade or what have you, to where just like a little mark isn't going to do it. You really have to put the whole story and spell it out for people just right on the packaging, and in such a way that it can't be really replicated without these larger companies just outright lying to people. We haven't discussed greenwashing on this program yet, but it really does seem like a type of greenwashing, where some companies are saying that they are more sustainable or they engage in more ethical or better practices than they actually do. Now, it sounds like you also have a rubric for your producers. Um, you said social responsibility, environmental responsibility, and something else. And I think you almost tried to gloss over it, but I am so interested, and the caffeine's really hitting. So, can you dive in just a little bit more into like the types of questions you ask these farmers that hit you up on Instagram or what have you, and then maybe an example of a good and a bad, so that people have an idea.
Absolutely. So with and this is difficult as well. I'm not going to pretend we're doing this as much as I would like us to be,
Sure.
because we're a very small business, and we minimum order quantities are like the biggest obstacle for any small coffee roaster,
Hmm.
um, because they want to sell you like a container, and you want a few bags, and so it's like a big disparity between 15,000 tons and like a few hundred kilos.
Oh,
Well, you obviously don't do kilos,
yeah.
but whatever
Well,
that would
but
be
that
in
is a big
pounds.
difference. I I recognize that it's a big difference.
Yes. So in terms of the environmental and social commitments, um, I mean, I think a really good example of this is we work with an exporter in Uganda called Agri Evolve. And so what they have done, this company, is they're based in the UK originally. It's a father and son. The father's here, um, just in kind of the north of England. And his son lives in Uganda in the Rwenzori mountain range. And they've gone into this community that had absolutely perfect soil, perfect climate. Like the heritage isn't necessarily there, but the conditions, and they have the high altitude. Like the conditions are fantastic for incredible coffee, but it was taking them maybe 6+ months to harvest. The
Mm.
practice was they didn't have the heritage there, so when you go to like South America, you have real strong coffee heritage, and it's all kind of intrinsic in a way. Obviously not, but like it feels that way. And in this area, it wasn't happening. So it was taking them so long to harvest, and then they were carrying the coffee down this mountain range on their backs,
Oh.
and it took so long to get to port and so long to ship that by the time it would arrive here, what could have been an exceptional 86, 87 point SCA point coffee was maybe not even specialty grade, or was maybe like an 80.
Mm.
And so because it had upgraded and the processing wasn't up to scratch and so on. And so what they have done is they've gone into the Rwenzori Mountains. They've made massive investment in milling. They bought a load of donkeys that can help them carry the sacks of coffee down the mountain range. The sacks are only 30 kilo sacks rather than 70 kilo sacks, so the donkeys can handle it comfortably.
Ah, okay.
Because again, that's important as well. You don't want to be overworking
Wow.
these donkeys. And through all sorts of these kind of change they're making on the ground, well, the coffee we have from them is exceptional. But more than that's great and that's a lovely story. But also, it could easily reek of white saviorism, or of like this
Sure.
British father and son going into Uganda and sorting out the community there because they. And so, rather than doing it in that way, they have built up this very like, intricate network of milling, of fermentation of the coffee, and so on. And they've done that with the local community. They're building schools to educate the local community about coffee, to instill that coffee culture, because this is an avenue out of poverty. And so there's no handouts, there's no kind of transposing of ideology. It's just working with the community there to build up the coffee quality in the area. And the result of that, like honestly, every time I get coffee from them, it's better than the last.
Oh.
I've only discovered them very recently, so that's and this was also from Instagram. It's fantastic. And what we were able to do was we were able to they had a school there, and the headmaster of the school is also a beekeeper. You'll see him on our Instagram quite a lot. And he also is kind of the guy in charge of the coffee production in the whole area. And so he wanted, there's a school for underprivileged children there, because you have to pay to go to school in Uganda, and so many people just stop being educated very early on because they have to go and work, and so on. And so this school is helping 80 underprivileged children access education, learn about kind of what's happening, and how not only the life skills you need in school and so on, but also like how to make a career for themselves in this very lucrative field. If you get it right, if the reputation of the area improves, which it has done, and is known for coffee excellence, then you can charge a premium for that, and they can benefit from that. And so what AgriEvolve have done is fantastic, and we're really excited to be able to like support the school. There were renovation works to make the classrooms a bit better, a bit more advanced, textbooks and so on, and we're happy to be able to do that with the 10%, which is great. But what's important is beyond that headline, like working with the community to make this happen. And I think that's going back to what you're saying. It's a bit of a long tangent, so apologies for that.
Oh, no. We love long tangents. That's wonderful.
But I think that's kind of like a good example of how that environmental and social commitment can be seen out at origin. And I guess with the bad example, there's unfortunately plenty of them, especially in South America and these large estate farms where you have workers that aren't well cared for, you have massive overuse of water or fertilizers, and so I guess the issue with our way of doing things is that we don't do anything to address that. We just don't buy from those places.
Right.
And so if I was going to be very critical of Coffee Story, but also all ethical coffee roasters, people like kind of that take that badge that actually mean it. Well, it's all well and good kind of saying like consumer forces and so on, but specialty coffee in the UK accounts for between 20 and 25% of all coffee. Most people are still going to what do is, I'm gonna get it. What they do, in my opinion, is absolutely not the best. And so they'll go into like South America and they'll buy up whole fields or like whole farms for at the C index price of coffee. Coffee's traded as like a futures. It's traded on Wall Street as a futures market, and it's like that cost of whatever it is at the moment. I don't really keep too much attention to that, but it's below the cost of production. And so when these big companies go in and they say, "Yep, we'll buy the whole field," and then what you see in Brazil is they end up burning a load of coffee at the end to try and just push that price up a little bit. That's not ideal. So that's what I guess would be a terrible example of what unethical coffee looks like.
I would agree with you. That's horrifying. I would say only because of the pandemic have I not been going to Starbucks very recently. But I think that as a consumer, I would want to adjust my practices to not necessarily penalize that behavior, but to say, that's just not the choice I'm going to make. Kind of like what you're doing. I want to do it a little
Exactly
bit
that.
differently. And it's always interesting as a consumer to have to evaluate like every discrete choice, right? because because the general trend across who I buy from or the things that I buy is that most organizations are not practicing um, in an ethical way or in a responsible way, and particularly not over time. So maybe what did in the beginning, maybe that business practice wasn't as bad then as it is now because circumstances have changed. And so just that, always having to learn about what the company is doing, how they're operating, what the long-term downstream impacts of those operations are in the given moment or years from now, it can be tough. And so I am very grateful for, producers like yourself, for our industry professionals like yourself that are taking that extra step and making sure that as an ongoing process that you are sustainable now and that you'll remain sustainable in the true meaning of the word sustainable. Right. Why don't we take a coffee break? Our first one. I can have some water, and I can feel the caffeine really kicking in. So we've got questions about your sustainable practices and the like coming up. So we'll get into it. Sound good?
Fantastic. Okay. Sounds good.
Hey everybody, we are back with Josh from Coffee Story. And Josh, I've got to get better about doing this. What is your like your website link and your Instagram and that kind of stuff so people can connect with you?
Oh, thank you. So it's all coffeestory.uk. So on Facebook and Instagram, we're at coffeestory.uk. And our website is www.coffeestory.uk.
And I did a little looking around on there, and you can see, you can get a few more details about those practices that Josh engages in on the website. And then if you want to hit him up on Instagram, you can ask more questions about it and keep the conversation going.
Please do.
Now, yeah, right. That's how. But that, by the way, that's how we talked. Dahlia from the last episode messaged me and talked about being a guest, and then she said, "Oh, and by the way, you should also really have a conversation with Josh." And so here we are. And now we are grilling Josh on sustainability. So I want to kind of broaden people's way of thinking about running a business that is sustainable. Because it's very difficult, and I think it's a different mindset than kind of the traditional capitalists exploit all the resources you can for the least amount of money and then sell it to anybody, any schmuck, for the most amount of money. Right. I think there is a process involved in running a business that's ethical, responsible, and sustainable that makes it a little different. So let me ask you, when you first started Coffee Story, was it 100%? Was it carbon regenerative right off the bat? Was it? What was it like? And then what are some of the business practices that you've adopted over time that have made it, more and more ethical, more and more responsible?
So carbon regenerative, certainly not, unfortunately. As excellent as that would be. I think that starting out, it was absolutely fundamental, unmovably gonna happen that I'm gonna start out the way I mean to continue.
Okay.
Because I mean, the best example of this is my retail packaging. So got some here. Here we go. So these little black bags, these are recyclable, and they cost four times the amount of a non-recyclable alternative.
Wow.
Only a few weeks ago learned that actually they're not as recyclable as the company told me they are because the black dye can impact machines and all of this type of stuff. So when we buy our next load of packaging bags, we're finding new ones. And that process took months and months and months to find recyclable
Yeah.
packaging that would sell me less than 30,000 units because I had no way of shifting that much coffee. Hopefully, that's a problem we'll face soon, but we're still nowhere near selling 30,000 bags of coffee. And so, with kind of starting out, it's absolutely essential to begin as you mean to go on, because otherwise, how many people with the best of intentions, you push it down, you kick the can down the road, and then next thing you know, you built up this whole business not around these, and then you have to kind of backtrack and implement these changes kind of in retrospect. And the result of that
Mhm.
isn't that you won't implement those changes, but it's that you end up with what lots of large corporations do, which is they have very lovely headline goals of by 2090 we're going to have plastic free this. And well, you know what, if you have a legacy of 100 years of coffee, I mean, it's still not good enough. You definitely shouldn't be saying, like, deferring this to the end of the century, basically. But if you have that business behind you and you have those processes in place and those machines, then fair enough, it takes longer to transition. But when you're starting out from scratch, you have no excuse. The only excuse you have is cost. And why is it that we will justify a cost, or like a small business owner can justify a cost for one thing, but not for the environment? And so I think for me, the biggest moment of knowing that I'm actually as committed to this as I always think I am in my head was we supply cafes and we deliver to
Oh.
them in reusable plastic tubs. Like,
Oh,
here's one.
wonderful.
So we deliver coffee in those boxes.
I'm
And
literally applauding Josh right now for that business practice.
because if you're giving someone 20 kilos of coffee, that's 4 tubs that you then take back, clean, bring them again, rather than 20 individual, maybe recyclable, maybe
Mhm.
not, but a hell of a lot of raw virgin materials gone into producing those packets. And so the impact of that is huge. And like, it's really, really large. And in all my time doing this, the 3 years, I think, there's only been one cafe that has said, no, not taking these plastic tubs. We don't have space for them. We're not interested. And it was basically down to this point of, do I lose this business, or do I have to kind of renege on that thing that is fundamental to everything that this business is about? And I was like, well, it is a business. I'd be stupid to pass up business opportunity when I can't afford to. Maybe in the future, when I can be a bit more picky, when the company can be like, yeah, we want to deal with you or not with you, fine. But we're a new business and we just don't have the ability to do that. That's the bottom line. Um,
So
sorry.
we've heard two business practices so far, and I think I feel as though we might even be able to dive into both. So the packaging to the consumer, like their individual consumer, is one. So when you first started out, what was the packaging for to the individual like?
So always recyclable. Um,
Okay, but not like the black recyclable that you
the black
showed us.
recyclable, yeah. These the exact same ones. We bought loads of them.
Oh,
Because they had to come
because you were
from
told.
exactly that. Yeah, we bought so many of these, and they, because the technology is changing all the time. So when we started out, it was all these are category 7 recyclables. It probably doesn't correlate in the US, but basically you can recycle them with plastic supermarket carrier bags. And here we
Great.
have like curbside recycling collection, and they go into some councils they will accept them and others don't. And so it's basically not ideal. But the technology just I looked for genuinely months and I couldn't find anything. Um,
So you picked the most recyclable packaging that you could at the time. That
precisely.
made sense for your business.
Yeah.
And then at some point, was it a consumer that came back to you and said, hey, these aren't as recyclable as you think they are? Or was it independent research that led you to that realization?
Independent research, because I'm constantly, every time these packages, like our supply of these get low, I'm looking, well, is this the best option anymore? First of all, from a price sense, absolutely not. It's ridiculous to be paying, as I said, 4 times more. Um,
Mm-hmm.
and so that's always like a huge kind of issue. Um, but then there's also the fact that actually I'm always testing coffees from competitors, and so I happened to get some coffee from them, and I saw that theirs was category 4 recyclable, which is curbside in a lot more places. And so I thought, well, hang on a minute, that
Yeah.
is obviously there. And so I'm always checking, I'm always trying to find out what is and what isn't kind of viable. In the UK context as well, this won't translate over into the States so well because obviously, like
That's
this
okay.
is kind of like local knowledge, I guess, of how these processes work. Um, but with that client who said no to the reusable boxes, and like said, I'm not doing it. So when I went to buy the packaging, I found like I had this choice of lose a customer or don't. I decided not to, and then I managed to find these big recyclable bags. Recycling isn't the solution anyway. It's terrible that like all of these packets, no matter if they can be recycled immediately, it doesn't matter. Like it's still using virgin raw
Mm-hmm.
materials because for food you have to. That's like the law over here. I'm sure it's the same over there with you guys. And so like this is not ideal. Selling coffee in packages is not ideal. We actually supply a couple of zero waste shops, so
Cool.
that's I'd much rather do that. That's way better. We don't have like premises ourselves, and so it's like trying to navigate that difficulty and being a viable business is doing the absolute best that we can, really, not just with some vague commitment for the distant future. I mean, that's kind of like the middle ground, if you like, that we reached.
So, okay, it sounds like we know where you started. We have an idea of where you're going because you've identified that category 4 packaging for the consumer. But you might prefer, you likely prefer, I feel safe to say, some way of just directly delivering the coffee to people in a reusable way that doesn't cost any virgin materials or what have you. That would be like the ideal for you.
In many ways, yes, but it's something I've looked into pretty extensively, and I think there's a few issues with this. So there's a
Oh,
trend in the UK. Again, sorry for keeping on speaking specifically about
no,
the
please
UK.
go ahead.
But there's a trend for like ethical brands to be like plastic free. Get your soap in this aluminium container. It's like, well, it might look nice and it might be plastic free, but that's just more of this kind of BS in the headlines. And actually, if you look at it, the resources in the aluminium, yes, it's infinitely recyclable, but it doesn't get recycled. And even if it does, it's being produced still. Or the alternative would be to kind of do coffee in glass. But then when someone smashes the glass or throws the glass away, the amount of material in that, the weight in the shipping, and the emissions from that is absolutely enormous. And then you also have to ask yourself as well, if you package the product in an insufficient way, and so the shelf life deteriorates because of that, then you've got this coffee that was grown. None of it's grown in Europe. It's all grown in either South America or in Africa countries, and it's come all the way around the world, been shipped here, been transported from container ship to road. We never use air shipping because it like air freight because it's just so um, devastating. And yes, the emissions for shipping are relatively lower compared to the alternatives, but it's still massive. Like the carbon footprint of any coffee in any country, unless you are literally growing it in your garden, is huge. And there's no pretending it's not. And then
Yeah.
you're going to put it in the incorrect packaging so that the shelf life is diminished and then it gets thrown away. And so it's more, as I was saying before, it's more than just the headlines. It's about a really as considered as possible approach to find the pros and cons. And
I,
it's not just about good marketing of here's plastic free this or whatever it may be.
I think one thing, so I work in marketing, right, for my day job. And I'm coming upon the realization that it's not necessarily that what as a consumer when I buy from a sustainable company that I'm paying for, the practices in that moment or the packaging, the best packaging that they were able to buy in that moment. It's this thought process that you are engaging in all the time when you're always thinking about the most sustainable way to get the product to you and to get the product to me or directly from them to me or whatever. You're always doing the math, right? And you're considering variables that I don't even have any knowledge of. But from this conversation, I trust you to make those better decisions. And if that costs me an extra dollar, then so be it. Because I can drink my coffee without, having an anxiety attack in the middle of the night. And I'm helping farmers in Uganda. I'm helping the school in Uganda and what have you. And the price differential is really minuscule in comparison.
Mm.
And I don't think a lot of people think about it in that way. My husband, for instance, I think I'm going to start a section of this podcast where I have one gripe about my husband. He, he is always almost as like a cultural, not reference point, 'cause something that's really important to him and the way he was brought up is always buying things at the lowest price first. Like he almost always compares things to what the lowest price is at some store within like a, I don't know, 3-state radius. I swear. And how much of a difference would it make if we instead could tell at a glance who is engaging in practices like yours, right? And then in a 3-state radius, be able to say, well, the coffee over here at this place, has 18 additional benefits for the entire world, even though it costs me an extra dollar. And I don't think that way of thinking is really like gone mainstream yet. But what a better place we'll live in if it does.
Absolutely.
Um, yeah, I'm gonna rant again. Because we talked about the packaging to the consumers, but we didn't really touch on again the reusable packaging that you supply to cafes, and there's the zero shops around, and that's an invisible kind of benefit to supporting businesses like yours because at no time and you're a consumer business, right? Like if I order coffee from you, I'm going to get the farmer's story on the packaging, right? There's not a lot of room on the packaging, so you can't tell me everything. But it's so huge that you are supplying the local area coffee in this reusable way, and it's just something other places aren't doing that they should be doing that I would want to support, but I wouldn't know about it, right? And so everyone buy coffee from Coffee Story in the UK if you're close by.
I think at the risk of kind of contradicting the host a bit, which you should never do, I think just on the point of that price differential, so in the market I'm in, what I found is that if you say you're ethical, if you say you're responsible, if you tell people all about the stories and all the rest of it, they're interested, 100%. The minute they have to pay more than a competitor, they're not interested. But if you can offer an ethical product on the one hand versus the unethical product, and that price point there's no differentiation, or that differentiation is really, really minimal. We're talking like less than $1 difference, like really small amount, then every single time they'll go to the ethical one because the consumer wants to do the right thing, but they don't want to think about recycling packaging and the emissions of this and that. And I think more now people are kind of worried about that as well. And so there's definitely a move of people who will happily pay a premium for this. But what I have found, with the exception of the ridiculously expensive packaging, is that there doesn't need to be necessarily such a high premium for green goods. Like it's a lot of that just comes down to the fact that there's a gap in the market, and so suppliers of green goods are like, cool, let's double our margin because why not? And so I think for us in the market we're in, it's a huge part of this is just trying to make it as accessible as possible. And sometimes people turn around and go, whoa, that's expensive. But specialty coffee always is expensive compared to like not specialty coffee. So I think within the specialty coffee roasters in the UK, like we're very competitively priced. Um, and I think what it is that's giving is, well, first of all, we don't have like the prestige of some of the better known people who charge like, I don't know, 11 or 12 pounds for a small little packet like the one I showed you before. Um, but also it's just because like our margin is more reasonable, I guess. Um, and so that's kind of like where we're at with that. I don't know. Maybe that's my rant. Maybe that's not relevant. But
Well, I'm not going to contradict the business owner, but some of that extra margin can go into marketing hopefully sustainable marketing. I don't know. In a way that, that helps amplify those stories and what have you, I think. Okay. Yay. I think it's important to touch again on the farmers that you support. It's really, I know it's one of your business practices, it's one of your points of ethos, I guess, to amplify those voices. So are there farmer stories you'd like to share? Is there something good you'd like to give to the world? Tell a good farmer story. I'm just going to drink my coffee and enjoy it.
Fantastic, do that. So obviously, as well as I told you the story about Uganda, I think there's a lovely situation in Peru. So we bought, actually, it was supposed to be for Christmas. We bought a load of Peruvian coffee. There were really bad rains. It got delayed. It didn't actually show up until far too late for Christmas. So we lost all that trade. And that's another issue with buying direct, which we do wherever possible, is that you have issues like that. Whereas if you're buying from a broker and it's in a warehouse, it's just in a warehouse. Heavy rains don't normally come and factor into this. And so this cooperative that we deal with in Peru, they are running really transformative projects. So coffee is, especially in Southern America, but generally around the world, it's a super patriarchal system. And that's kind of like a legacy of colonialism, because it's a colonial crop. It was like coffee was brought out of Ethiopia to Yemen and then to Latin America via like colonial kind of expedition. And so when you're looking in Latin America, you've got this massive patriarchal system of the men are the ones that benefit, and the women are totally financially dependent on the male household members. And then so what this co-op is called Juma. I'm not going to pretend I can say the Spanish name very well, so I'm not going to.
Okay.
And basically, what they're doing a whole load of different things. But this particular project that I want to tell you about is called the Coffee Woman Project. And so it is empowering the women in the cooperative to grow their own coffees, to market their own coffees, to roast their own coffees, and to sell them on the local market. And so what this is doing is you've got, I think it's 35 women ranging in age from 18 all the way to 65. Like, it's a really broad project. However, these people working within this cooperative, they're turning the system on its head, because they're being involved in areas of production that women not involved in at all. And so I think that's fantastic. And I mean, the money that we actually give to back to Peru for our Peruvian coffee is going to the farmer himself. He's called Coleman. We need to actually transfer him. That's on the to-do list. And he, it's to be able to be involved in these projects at Origin is fantastic. When I started, I had this whole vision of going to Origin all the time and all this type of thing. And between airfares, pollution, and coronavirus, that hasn't happened very much. And as the kind of future develops, I want to be more involved in those stories themselves, rather than just telling our consumers and our people, prospective consumers, about what's going on. I'd very much like to be more kind of intimately involved in those stories. But I mean, that one in Peru is always a nice one. They're also running a project to offset the carbon emissions of transportation to the port.
Oh.
And that's through reforestation with indigenous tree species. That's a whole other issue which we will not get into with carbon offsetting and all the rest of it. And then we support a fantastic charity which is based in the US. So I would encourage all of your listeners to check them out. They're called Food for Farmers.
Tell me about Food for Farmers.
Food for Farmers, yeah. And they work to tackle malnourishment in farming communities, because it's, when I first heard about this, I thought, what? But what happens is, in lots of Latin American countries, they grow whatever crop that it is that they're growing, especially in coffee, and they sell all of that crop. They don't have anything left for their families, and they don't make a lot of money. And then they end up buying in junk food, like junky packet food, and it doesn't have the nutritional content that people there need, or any people need. And as a result, there's massive issues of malnourishment in farming communities, especially amongst children. So what Food for Farmers do is they go into they're working on the ground with the communities as well. Again, that's kind of essential to everything. None of this, when I say go into, it sounds like they're parachuting in and then making change and then leaving. It's like, not at all. That's a remnant of my kind of political background of like, don't ever do that. It doesn't work. And so they're going in Origin, working with communities to educate about nutrition, and to ensure that farming communities have access to high nutritional food and aren't dependent on this, and are earning more money for their crops, so that they're able to kind of not only hold some back to feed their families, but also kind of to be able to benefit from food, in the way that we as consumers, when we're going to grab our coffee, we never think about, malnourishment. That doesn't cross our mind. Like, you go to whatever coffee shop you go to, or you brew it yourself at home, like these things are not even in the picture. And I think that's like the issue with kind of Western consumerism, is that we have no benefits, not no concern, but no awareness of what's going on, where the stuff that we use, make, eat, whatever, comes from. And so that's basically the essence of Coffee Stories, to tell the story behind the coffee, to make that connection between consumers and producers. And yes, all of the stories we're telling are nice stories of the farmers we work with that are doing this, and the issues we're tackling and helping to contribute to on the ground, and all the rest of it. But there's a lot of work to be done still. And we ourselves, like, we have room to grow as well. So I was saying to Jerome in our coffee break, that like we don't always buy direct from farmers. We try to, as much as I can. I try to. With this Peruvian coffee, I bought way too many bags of it, because if I bought more bags, the price went down for the shipping. And so I was like, okay, buy loads of them. And I'm stuck with a load of Peruvian coffee that I've like, it's fantastic. People love it, but I went totally to town. Like, forecast aside, I didn't need those, and so that's not always possible for a small business, cash flow and so on. And so sometimes we buy from spot coffee from brokers, and the brokers we deal with always pay the farmers like at least twice the fair trade price, so they're getting a good deal. And we still share the story of that farmer with you on the packets and so on, but that's not the way we'd like to be able to buy coffee. But it's a reality, and that's kind of, I think that's important to put out there as well, that I don't want it to come across as like explaining what Coffee Story does and why the sun shines out of kind of the sun shining from us, and this not that at all. It's always a progress, and we're always kind of reflecting and learning and trying to do better. And as we grow, that's the aim, to be able to do more rather than to scale back that commitment.
I agree. I think it's always going to be a journey, and I think if we had the same conversation 10 years from now, you would just make sure to identify something else that you could be doing better, because it's just part of the ethos. Let's take a quick coffee break, and then we'll come right back and we'll talk about supporting Coffee Story.
Fantastic.
We are back from a very calm, peaceful, thoughtful coffee break. I was given the opportunity to find an inspirational quote to relay to you all, and I declined. But to conclude the conversation, as always, Josh, how can we at the Bottomless Coffee community support you? And it's, as coffee drinkers, this one should be easy.
Well, I mean, I don't even know if we can ship to the US. Buy our coffee, please. But I think more than just like the obvious. I think for us, being aware of where things come from, or like sharing a little thought as you drink your coffee for that process that it's gone through, because it's not just arrived in a packet. Like, that's been picked, it's been washed, it's been processed, it's been milled, and I know I'm not supposed to talk about farmers and so on, but like, it's gone through this whole big long chain. Then it's been shipped, and it's been roasted, and then it's been shipped out to you. And so just having that awareness of what it actually is that you're consuming, I think for us and for our mission, that's kind of like halfway there. And then making that conscious choice of doing the right thing, supporting an ethical coffee company. I'd very much like it to be ours, but there's also a whole host of coffee companies where you're listening as well. who are just trying to do the right thing. And I think that's kind of this really important thing. I mean, supporting these brands, because anyone can go to a big chain, but actually those local independents, the ones that could do with the support, and they're actually trying to do more impressive and transformative things. And so just being a part of that story, if you like, is what it's all about. And so for us, follow us on Instagram, give our Facebook page a like sign up to our newsletters on our website, and obviously buy the coffee as well, taste it, enjoy it. But more more long lasting than all of that is just to have that awareness as a consumer of the power that you have, because those big companies that are doing pretty dreadful things, if there's consumers saying we're not going to buy from you unless you change your ways, well, you know what, I would genuinely, honestly, not from a business sense but from a personal sense, I would love for everything that I'm doing to just be, and what, like, who cares, everyone's doing it, it's irrelevant. I mean, that's what it should be. And I think when that is the case, then I'll find something else to do. But I think that change only happens with consumers making that conscious effort. So that's kind of what I would say to that.
Support companies that are doing the right thing. I love that. And to continue to plug your company that's doing the right things, you never know. I could have friends in the UK that drink coffee, so I could buy for them on your website. I hear there's a Peruvian blend in stock.
It is indeed. That one's a very sweet one. So yeah.
Well, thank you so much for this wonderful, caffeinated on my part conversation. I'm really excited to continue engaging with you and to follow your journey to see what you're doing next. I don't know. What's the packaging gonna look like in a couple of months? This has been really wonderful.
Thank you so much. It's been a pleasure to come on, and I hope that was beneficial to your listeners.
Oh, it's going to be fantastic. Thank you, Josh.
Very welcome.
You did it! Thank you for joining in the conversation today. If you would like exclusive access to live streams of these conversations, if you want to hear what goes on during the coffee breaks, or if you'd like to join a community of people who help to make this podcast possible, then please join our Patreon community at patreon.com/bottomlesscoffee. Bottomless Coffee Podcast is produced by me, Jerome Evans, on social media everywhere as @JeromeTEvans. Our Patreon producers are listed in the episode description. You can connect with the podcast on Instagram at Bottomless Coffee Podcast. Our music is by Noir et Blanc V and God Mode. Thanks all, and I'll see you next time.